They said the queen of the Vethra did not possess a face designed for smiling. Her court architects had studied this once. A team of 12 xenobiologists commissioned by the previous conclave of sovereigns to catalog the physiological signatures of every regnant ruler across 32 inhabited systems. Their findings on Queen Suvatha's nail were published in a 600-page document that concluded, with the measured certainty of people who had never met her, that the muscles required for what humans called a smile existed within her species, but had been dormant in Suvatha's specifically for so long that they had calcified, essentially, into permanent repose. The document used the word architectural. Her face, they wrote, was architectural. She had read the document. She had read all documents about herself. She kept the xenobiologist's report in a case made of black glass in the corner of her reception chamber, illuminated by a thin column of rose gold bioluminescence, the way other rulers kept trophies. She did not display it out of vanity. She displayed it because precision was its own form of power, and because the document was, in every essential fact, correct. She did not smile. She had not smiled in the 41 years since her ascension, not when her first rival was brought before her in chains, not when the Kethara Accord was signed, ending a war that had killed 11 million of her people. Not when her only daughter, Nuviri, took her first steps across the cold obsidian floor of the natal chamber and looked up at her with eyes the color of dying stars. Not once. Her guards had a name for it among themselves. She knew this because she knew everything that happened within 100 meters of her body. They called her expression the stone verdict, the face of a creature who had already judged you and found you insufficient and had moved on to other business. Her prime warden had once told a junior guard that the queen's face was the most terrifying thing he had ever seen, and not because it was cruel, but because it was complete. There was nothing missing from it. It was a face that wanted nothing and lacked nothing, and in that way it was the most alien thing in a species already alien to most of the galaxy. So when the human arrived, when Commander Marcus Idle of the now-destroyed ECS Perihelion was dragged into her throne room with his hands restrained behind him in Vethra polymer bonds, blood drying on his left temple, his uniform in the specific state of ruin that spoke of someone who had fought very hard and lost very recently, she looked at him the way she looked at everything. Without smiling. Without anything. She catalogued him the way she catalogued everything. 1.82 meters, male, late 30s by human standards, the lean-muscled build of someone who had spent years in low-gravity environments and compensated with deliberate exercise. The blood at his temple was already browning at the edges. His hands, despite the bonds, were relaxed. His jaw was set but not clenched. He was afraid. She could read the cortisol spike in the micro-tremor of the tendons along his forearm. But he was afraid the way experienced soldiers are afraid, with an awareness of the fear that kept it below the threshold of useful information. He looked at her. Not at the throne, not at the ceiling's vaulting architecture of living stone threaded with silver light, not at the 12 royal guards standing in absolute stillness along the chamber walls. He looked at her. Commander Marcus Idle, said her prime warden, Sail Vorath, in the clipped formal tongue. Survivor of the human warship Perihelion, destroyed at the Outer Reach engagement 16 days prior, captured attempting to access the navigational relay at Vethra Station 7. I know who he is, she said. The commander said nothing. He kept looking at her, not with defiance exactly, something more patient than defiance. She descended from the throne, not something she did often. Usually she let the architecture of the room do the work of impressing people, the raised dais, the vaulting space, the guards perfectly spaced so that any visitor's eye was drawn inevitably up and across to where she stood above them. But something about the way this human was standing made her want to close the distance. She wanted a better view of the thing that wasn't defiance and wasn't fear. She stopped 3 meters from him. He was taller than she'd estimated. and his eyes were a specific shade of dark brown that she had not catalogued before in human variation. Not black, not the warm amber some humans carried, something in between, the color of the deep levels of the ocean on Vethra Prime just above where the bioluminescent fields began. "You came for the navigational relay," she said in his language. She spoke 12 languages. Human standard was not her most practiced, but it was precise enough. "Why?" He considered the question as if it were interesting. "I needed to go home," he said. "The relay leads nowhere that would take you home." "Not directly." A pause. "I was going to use it as a breadcrumb, amid a signal pattern. Someone would come looking eventually. Someone would come and find you imprisoned. Someone would come and find the station and wonder why it was broadcasting a navigational ping on an encrypted human military frequency. That's different from being found." He tilted his head slightly. "You're not going to ask me what the signal contained. Most commanders ask what the signal contained." "I already know what it contained," she said. "Your name, rank, vessel registration, and a phrase in what I'm told is a regional human dialect that translates roughly as 'the fish is sick.' Your crew will know it as a code for hostile capture. They will also know from your rank that you are the most senior surviving officer. They will send a diplomatic inquiry within 90 days. He stared at her. "I have had human prisoners before, Commander Idle. Not many who set up a breadcrumb trail first. 3, you are the 4th. She turned and walked back toward the dais, not hurrying, letting him watch her go. "The first 2 attempted to negotiate. The 3rd attempted to escape." She mounted the first step without looking back. "You are the first to attempt subtlety." "How'd the 3rd one do?" She reached the throne and turned to face him. "He was fast," she said, "for a human." She watched him process this, watched the flicker of something move through his face, not grief exactly, something quieter, an acknowledgement. "What happens to me?" he asked. "You will be detained until the diplomatic inquiry arrives, at which point you will become a subject of negotiation." She settled into the throne. "This is the most fortunate circumstance available to you, Commander. I suggest you not complicate it." He nodded once. It was not a grateful nod. It was the nod of someone filing information for future use. They took him to the detainment wing. She watched the doors close behind the escort on the chamber's surveillance feed and sat for a long time in the quiet. She could not locate the specific thing in her face that would have been called an expression, but something in her was doing what, in another person, might have been called noticing. The detainment wing of Vethra Palace was not designed for cruelty. Suvathas had inherited it from her mother and had never found reason to change it because it was already efficient. Individual cells carved from the same living stone as the rest of the palace, each with a sleep platform, a sanitation alcove, and a window of one-way atmospheric crystal that showed the outer terraces, and beyond them, the vast silver-green landscape of Vethra Prime's second continent. The lighting cycled with the planet's 18-hour day. The food was whatever the prisoner's physiology required, prepared adequately. She watched Commander Idle on the surveillance feed the way she watched all prisoners. For the first hour, to understand them, then periodically after that to verify continued compliance. In the first hour, he did the following things in this order. He examined the cell methodically, running his hands along every seam in the stone, testing the window's resistance, checking the thickness of the door. He looked at the surveillance lens directly. He found it in under 40 seconds, which was faster than any prisoner she'd had, and gave it a small, humorless salute. He sat on the sleep platform. He lay flat on his back, stared at the ceiling, and put both hands behind his head, and in this posture he appeared to fall asleep. She did not believe he was asleep. But he held the posture for 4 hours without moving, and at the end of it she concluded that either he had remarkable discipline or he was, in fact, capable of sleeping anywhere under any conditions, and she was not certain which interpretation she preferred. On the second day, she sent him a reader unit loaded with standard information packets, Vethra history, diplomatic protocols, the relevant sections of the Outer Reach Territorial Agreement. Standard practice. Prisoners who understood the political situation were easier to manage. On the third day, he sent a message back through the duty officer. Tell her I finished the history section. Tell her the part about the Cathara Accord doesn't match the human military record of that engagement. Tell her I'd like to discuss which version is accurate if she has time. She read this standing at her desk and did not move for a moment. She sent back, I do not have time. He sent back, understood, maybe later. She stared at that for longer than she intended. On the fifth day, she had him brought to the secondary audience chamber, smaller than the throne room, designed for negotiation rather than ceremony, with a low table and seats on either side that were technically equal in height, which was a political concession she had installed when the Cathara negotiations required it, and which she had never bothered to remove. She told herself the reason she was meeting with him was practical. 16 days was a long time to be in space after a ship destroyed, and she needed to understand his physical and psychological condition before the diplomatic delegation arrived, so she could present him in whatever state was most advantageous to her negotiating position. He sat across the table from her in clean clothes. They'd given him Vethra-made fabric in a neutral gray, and it didn't fit quite right across his shoulders, slightly too narrow, and he didn't seem to care, and he looked at her with the same expression as before. The patient one. The Cathara Accord, she said. Your history says the Vethra secured the outer reach boundary by superior tactical positioning, he said. The human military record says the Vethra sued for peace, because 3 of their 7 fleets were below operational capacity, and they had a succession crisis that they couldn't afford to resolve while fighting a war on 2 fronts. And which account do you believe? I believe both are partially true and that the full picture is more complicated. He folded his hands on the table. History usually is. She looked at him. You said this because you expect me to respect nuance. I said it because it's what I actually think. Those can be the same thing. They usually are, he agreed. That's not a reason to dismiss the thought. There was a pause. It was not an uncomfortable pause, which was unusual. Most humans in her presence found silence uncomfortable and attempted to fill it, which was a form of weakness she had no patience for. What was the perihelions' mission? She asked. I can't tell you that. You are aware that I could compel you. You're also aware that information obtained under compulsion is unreliable, he said, and you seem like someone who prefers reliable information. She studied him. You are trying to indicate that voluntary cooperation is in my interest. I'm indicating that I'd rather talk to you than not talk to you, and that I'd rather the talking be voluntary on both sides, and that I'm going to be here for at least 90 days, and we could make this very unpleasant, or we could just. He made a small gesture with one hand, something that didn't fully translate but whose intent was clear. We could just talk. Tell me about your ship, she said. He talked about the perihelion for 40 minutes. He did not mention tactical details or mission parameters. He talked about the crew, the chief engineer who had been with the vessel for 11 years and could fix anything with 4 components and a prayer, the navigator who had grown up in a pressurized colony and had never seen an open sky until she was 12, and had been trying to find the most beautiful one in the galaxy ever since, the young weapons officer, barely 3 years out of the academy, who kept a photograph of his dog on the underside of his console, where regulations said personal items weren't permitted. The dog was named Biscuit. The weapons officer had died in the engagement that destroyed the ship, so had 47 others. Commander Idle talked about them the way someone talks about people they are still in the process of losing, not past tense, not yet. She did not say anything when he finished. There was nothing she had been trained to say. Her species had ritual mourning periods and formal grief protocols, and a highly organized system of memorial observance, none of which applied here, and she had never learned the informal human version, the small acknowledging sound, the simple "I'm sorry," because she did not say things she didn't mean, and she was not sorry in any way she could locate. She had fought his kind before. She had signed orders that produced this kind of loss on his side and on hers. And she understood this as the arithmetic of governance, and did not feel guilt about it, only a kind of heavy patience for the way the universe kept returning to this particular equation. She said, "The navigator, did she find one? The most beautiful sky?" He looked at her, something shifted in his face. "She said Cathari Station at double dawn," he said. "When both suns come up at the same time, the atmosphere filters it so you get this." He stopped. "She had a word for it, a color that doesn't exist anywhere else." He shook his head. "I don't have the color." "No," she said, "you wouldn't." She sent him back to his cell. She sat in the secondary audience chamber for a long time after he left, in the specific quality of silence that a room holds when someone who was recently speaking in it is no longer there. She met with him every 3 days after that. She told herself it was operational. She needed to understand him before the diplomatic delegation arrived, needed to know the range of his potential behavior in a negotiation setting, needed to gather information that would give her an advantage in whatever discussion followed the recovery of a human commander from her custody. She told herself this because it was partially true. She asked him about Earth. He told her about the city where he'd grown up, coastal, a place where the sea came right to the edge of the buildings, where children learned to swim before they learned to ride a bicycle, where the air smelled like salt and industrial-grade coffee, and the particular kind of exhaustion that belongs to cities that never fully sleep. He told her about his family, a mother who had worked in the municipal engineering corps, a father who had been a teacher of something called mathematics, which was not precisely what the Vethra called mathematics but was related to it, a sister who was a doctor on a colony world 3 systems from Earth, and who he hadn't spoken to in 8 months because their schedules simply hadn't aligned. "You have not communicated with a sibling for 8 months, Suvathis said, and this is unremarkable to you." "It's not unremarkable, it's just what happens." He shrugged. "She knows I'm out here, I know she's out there. When we talk, we pick up exactly where we left off. Distance doesn't change people who know each other well enough." She thought about her daughter, Nuveri, who was currently on the Academy world of Sethavon, and who sent formal dispatches every 2 weeks, and with whom she had not had an unscheduled conversation in 3 years. "Does she know about the ship?" he asked. "Your daughter." "How do you know about my daughter?" "The information packet." He tilted his head. "The political section covers the royal lineage. She's listed." "She knows about the political situation generally," Suvathis said. "I would not alarm her with specifics." "Because the specifics are alarming." "The specifics are manageable." She looked at him. "I told you on the first day that this situation was the most fortunate available to you. I meant that. The diplomatic process will proceed. You will go home." "I know," he said, and he did not say it the way people said things they didn't believe, not with false brightness or performative calm. He said it the way he said most things, like someone who had looked at the available information, concluded this was probably accurate, and decided to proceed on that basis. "I'm more worried about the people who got off the perihelion before she went down. 11 life pods. They scattered at the edge of the reach. If I'm here, there." He stopped. "I will make inquiries," she said. He stared at her. "On behalf of the diplomatic process," she said, "it is relevant to the negotiation to know the full accounting of survivors." He nodded once, the same filing for future reference nod. But something in his eyes did a thing that she did not immediately have a word for. She made the inquiries. 3 of the life pods had been recovered by Vethra patrol vessels, and the survivors were in a detention facility on the second station. 2 had made it to the neutral zone and were presumably in human hands by now. The remaining 6 were unaccounted for. She reported this to him at their next meeting. He received it in silence, and she watched him do the arithmetic she had done herself. 11 pods, approximately 4 to 6 persons per pod. Best case scenario. Worst case. 6 unaccounted for doesn't mean gone, she said. No, he agreed, it doesn't. The neutral zone search grid in that region was last deployed 16 days ago. They may have reached it. The outer reach currents in subspace run approximately 0.7 toward the neutral zone from that engagement's position. 6 pods drifting would hit the zone boundary in about 20 days from launch, he finished, if the emergency drives held and they didn't fire them. I have requested that the neutral zone monitoring stations flag any incoming signals from human lifepod emergency beacons. He was looking at her with that expression again, the one she didn't have a word for. Why, he asked, not suspicious, genuinely asking. I told you, she said, it is relevant to the... I heard you the first time, he said quietly. Why? She looked at him for a moment. Because 47 people died, she said, and 6 pods are unaccounted for, and you have been sitting in a cell for 12 days doing exactly what I asked without complication, and it costs me nothing to make an inquiry. It was not a complete answer, and she suspected they both knew it. He said, thank you. She didn't know what to do with that. Not because she didn't understand gratitude, she understood it as a concept. She had received it formally many times, but this was different. This was the informal variety, the kind that lands without ceremony and expects nothing in return and is, because of those qualities, somehow heavier. You are welcome, she said, which was the correct response, and she returned to her schedule. On the 23rd day, something happened that she did not expect, and that was not in any file she had been given about humans. He laughed. She had come to the secondary audience chamber for their scheduled meeting, and arrived to find him already there. She had taken to having him escorted early and waiting for her, which was also a departure from protocol, but which she had not revised because it was more efficient, and he was standing at the chamber's side window, which showed the inner courtyard garden, and one of the palace groundskeepers was out there doing something with one of the ceremonial stone birds that lined the garden's central path. The stone birds were a traditional element of Vethra palace design, carved from a specific mineral that the planet's mineral-secreting insects worked into intricate wing structures over centuries. They were very old and very serious-looking, and their function was entirely ceremonial and aesthetic. The groundskeeper had somehow managed to set one of them askew in its mounting during maintenance, and it was now leaning at a 15-degree angle with one wing jutting upward at a direction that its sculptor had not intended, and the groundskeeper was attempting to correct this and failing in a series of increasingly elaborate ways. Commander Idle was watching this through the window. And then he laughed. Not a polite laugh, not a social sound, the kind humans made when something was marginally amusing and politeness required acknowledgement. He laughed the way people laugh when they are caught off guard by something genuinely funny. A sudden exhale, a sharp sound, then a longer one that bent him forward slightly at the waist, one hand going to the window's edge for balance. She had been in the doorway for 3 seconds before he heard her enter. He straightened, turned, and there was still the remnant of it in his face. The smile had not quite finished leaving yet. It was doing something to the lines around his eyes, something to the set of his mouth. She looked at his face. She had catalogued many things in 41 years. The exact molecular composition of the Cathara Treaty ink. The precise angle of a plasma blade at the moment of its ignition. The specific shade of her daughter's eyes, which were 3 degrees warmer than her own. She had catalogued all of these and held them in her mind as the kind of information that had weight. She catalogued this: the slightly crooked leftward lean of the smile, the depth of the expression, which was not surface but went through him the way light goes through certain kinds of crystal, the way it changed everything in his face all at once, not one feature at a time, but all of it together, a systemic rearrangement, the way weather changes a landscape. She said, "What is?" and he turned and gestured at the window. "Your groundskeeper," he said, and his voice still had laughter in it, sitting under the words like a current. "He's been trying to fix that bird for 20 minutes, and every time he adjusts one side, the other side." He turned back to the window, and then immediately turned back to her, because the groundskeeper had now attempted a new approach, and it had gone worse than all the previous ones. He laughed again. It was the second time she had heard it, and it was completely different from silence, and from her guard's controlled stillness, and from everything in the room, which was designed for gravity and ceremony. And it was. Something moved in her face. Not a smile. She was not capable of a smile. The xenobiologists had established this with anatomical certainty. The muscles were calcified. This was documented. Something moved anyway. It was very small. It happened in the corner of her mouth, at the outermost edge, and it was not a smile in any formal sense, but it was a change in the architecture. And she felt it, which she had not expected, the slight unfamiliar stretch of a thing that had been still for a very long time. She turned toward the window. The groundskeeper had now enlisted a second groundskeeper, and both of them were arguing while the stone bird continued to lean with its wing extended, and the whole tableau was objectively. She made a sound. It was very quiet. It was not something she would have chosen to make in any room with another person, let alone in a room with 12 royal guard stationed along the outer walls, and the duty officer in the observation alcove and Commander Marcus Idle standing 2 meters away from her. It was a short sound, an exhale that was not quite uniform, a small and involuntary compression of air. The duty officer did not move. The royal guard did not move. They had been trained for the specific impassivity that her presence required, and they were very good at it. But she heard, in the particular quality of stillness that came into the room, the way a room sounds when everyone in it has stopped breathing at exactly the same moment. She heard 12 people not react. Commander Idle was looking at her. Not in surprise, not in the way people looked at her when she did something they didn't expect, which was a specific look that contained a small quantity of fear inside a larger quantity of recalibration. He was looking at her the way he looked at everything, with attention, with patience, with something that was not quite what she would have called warmth, if warmth were a category she applied to interactions with prisoners, but which was. The groundskeepers below had now successfully recruited a third colleague, and the 3 of them had managed to lift the stone bird and were attempting to reposition it. And in the process of doing this, they had lost control of it slightly, and there was a moment where all 3 of them were holding it at different angles, and none of the angles were right, and the bird was describing a slow and dignified arc toward the ground. And then all 3 of them lunged simultaneously and caught it, which was a remarkable piece of coordination, given that they had failed to coordinate on anything else in the past 20 minutes. She watched this, and she was aware, with a precise and clinical detachment, that the thing happening in her face was happening again, in the same corner, with slightly more amplitude than before. "They got it," Commander Idle said. His voice was different. She could not immediately account for the difference. She thought for a moment and located it. It was gentler, as if the situation required care. "They did," she agreed. They watched the 3 groundskeepers set the stone bird back in place. It was now leaning slightly in the other direction, but only very slightly, and the 3 of them looked at it for a moment and then at each other, and she could not hear them from this distance, but the body language was extremely clear, and whatever they said made the sound in her move again involuntary, slightly larger than the two previous times. She became aware that she was standing at a window with a prisoner watching groundskeepers and making sounds, and that her 12 royal guard were not moving, and that the duty officer was not moving, and that the air in the room had the quality of people trying very hard to be nowhere at all. She turned from the window. She walked to her seat at the table and sat. She arranged her hands in front of her. She looked at Commander Idle, who had also turned from the window and was finding his seat with the unhurried economy of movement he always used. He sat, he looked at her. In his face there was still the remnant of the laughter. It had not left entirely. It was decreasing but slowly, and it was still doing things to the lines around his eyes. And underneath the laughter there was something else. The something else was careful and quiet, and she could not identify it precisely, but she recognized that it was the opposite of the thing people usually did when they discovered something new about her, which was to file it and use it, and hold it as leverage for later. Whatever he was doing with what had just happened, it was not that. "The Cathara Accord," she said. "The human record of the negotiation. Tell me what it says." He told her. For 90 minutes they talked about the accord. She corrected 3 factual errors in his version. He pointed out 2 passages in her version that were the kind of diplomatic language that means the opposite of what it says. They argued about the boundary clause in Section 7 in a way that was technically about treaty interpretation and practically about something she was not going to name out loud. When he left, she remained at the table. She sat in the silence the room held after him and looked at her hands. On the 31st day, she found him in the secondary audience chamber before she arrived, as usual, and he was doing something with his hands. He had a piece of paper. She had had paper sent with the reader unit on the 3rd day, standard procedure. Some prisoners preferred written correspondence, and he was folding it. Not folding it the way people fold documents, flat and functional, folding it deliberately with precise small creases into something. She watched from the doorway for 30 seconds before he heard her. When he turned, he was holding a small white bird made of paper. It was about the size of his palm, folded into a form that was immediately recognizable as the silhouette of a flying creature, even to someone who had never seen this particular kind of origami. "It's a crane," he said, answering the question she hadn't asked yet. "Human tradition, paper folding, my mother taught me." He set it on the table. She said, "If you fold 1,000 of them, you get a wish." She sat at the table. She looked at the paper crane. It was improbably delicate, all right angles resolved into the smooth, organic suggestion of a wing. "What would you wish for?" she asked. "Right now," he sat across from her, "the obvious thing. To go home. To know they're all right," he said. "The one still missing, I know I can't know. I know the math on the current drift says what it says. He shook his head once and reached for the crane and set it more precisely in the center of the table as if its exact position mattered. "Wishing isn't rational, I know that. My father would have said it was a redirection of anxiety into a constructive physical activity, which it probably is. Your father, the mathematics teacher. He would have made an equation for it." Something moved in his expression. "He's been gone for 6 years. I still catch myself thinking I should tell him things." She considered this. The Vethra had formal grief doctrines, structured periods of withdrawal, ritualized memory observance, a specific calendar of mourning that lasted precisely 3 years and then formally concluded, which she had always considered an efficient approach to an inefficient emotion. She had observed her own mother's death through this protocol. She had found it adequate. "What would you tell him?" she said. "If you could." He looked at her for a moment as if the question were unexpected. Then he looked at the paper crane. "About this," he said. "I'd tell him about this, the palace, the situation, the all of it." He paused. "He would have asked me 100 questions about your species' political structure. He would have been a more efficient interrogator than you." The corner of his mouth moved. "Probably. He was systematic. He picked up the paper crane and turned it in his fingers. He also would have said I should fold the other 999. How many have you made? 3, he set the crane down again. I only have so much paper. She looked at the crane for a moment. Then she said to the duty officer in the alcove, have a full ream of paper sent to Commander Idle's cell. The duty officer replied in the affirmative. Commander Idle looked at her. That is 423 sheets, he said. A ream is 500. I know what a ream is. He was looking at her with the attentive expression. You're saying I have enough for one wish. I'm saying you have enough for one wish with a substantial margin of error. She picked up the paper crane from the center of the table. She held it by one wing, carefully, not wanting to distort its structure. It was lighter than she expected, not surprising. It was paper, but there was something about its lightness that was different from what she had been prepared for. How long did it take you to learn this? A few hours, he said. When I was 9, I have no memory of the actual learning, only of having done it and of the first one I made, which was terrible. My mother kept it anyway. He watched her hold the crane. Try the other wing, the left one, gently. She moved her grip to the other wing. She could feel the paper wanting to fold in a specific direction, the material memory of the creases insisting on a shape. She did not unfold it. You're afraid of breaking it, he said. I am not afraid of anything. You're being careful of breaking it, he amended, and the correction was so precise and delivered so matter-of-factly that it landed before she could decide what to do with it. She held the crane for another moment. Then she set it back on the table. The paper you have in your cell, she said. When you have made 999 of these, I will come and see the 999th. He looked at her, the attentive expression, and underneath it something. She had been cataloging these for 31 days now, and she was getting better at identifying them. This one was the careful, quiet thing she had no word for. That assumes I'm here long enough, he said. The diplomatic process takes as long as it takes, she said. I control the scheduling. A pause. The duty officer in the alcove was not breathing. She could feel it from 20 meters away. Is that an indefinite stay? He asked. It is a statement of fact about scheduling. She stood. Make your cranes, Commander Idle. I will see the 999th. She left before he could answer. On the 38th day, she asked him to teach her. She regretted it almost immediately, not because she changed her mind, but because of the specific quality of his reaction, which was to produce a sheet of paper from the ream in his cell. She had approved bringing it to the audience chamber without his asking, having concluded the paper was not a security risk, and to hand it to her across the table without ceremony or comment, and the lack of ceremony was somehow worse than if he'd made something of it. He talked her through the folds, methodically, precisely, with the patience of someone who understood that precision was respect. He did not guide her hands. He described each fold in terms of angles and ratios, and she executed them, and they were not perfect. Her hands were not accustomed to this kind of small, deliberate pressure, and twice she made a crease too hard, and he said gently, less, and she did it less. And after 40 minutes she held something that was recognizably the same form as his crane. It listed slightly to one side. The fourth one always lists, he said. Wait until the 60th. You told me you'd made 3. I made 3 in the palace. He looked at his own crane, the first one, which had been sitting in the center of the table for 7 days by this point. I've made thousands before. My mother had a storage jar she kept them in. I used to ask her to take them out when I was sick and count them. He paused. She'd be up to about 4,000 by now, give or take. Does she still keep them? As far as I know. He looked at her listing crane. Hold the wings level and breathe out slowly, then let go. She did this. The crane settled in her hand, slightly lopsided but intact. It was not as good as his. It was recognizably a crane. 997 more, he said. I have not committed to making 997 more. No, he agreed, but you made one. He tilted his head. What would you wish for? She looked at the paper bird in her hand, the small flawed thing. She thought about her daughter on the Academy world, sending dispatches every 2 weeks, each one correct and complete and at the appropriate formal register. She thought about the xenobiologist's report in its blacklist case. She thought about 41 years of a face that wanted nothing and lacked nothing and was complete, and about the way completeness was not the same as fullness, and about the way she had never, until 31 days ago, had occasion to notice that there was a difference. I don't know yet, she said, which was not what she had planned to say. He looked at her, he didn't say anything. She set the crane on the table beside his. They listed in slightly different directions, like two people leaning away from the same thing. On the 42nd day, she asked Sale Voreth about it. Not about the commander specifically. She was not going to have that conversation with Sale Voreth, who had been her prime warden for 19 years, and who she trusted more than anyone in the palace, and who she therefore could not afford to be transparent with about this particular line of thought. She asked about the paper birds. The origami cranes, Sale Voreth said. He was a long-limbed Vethra male of late middle years with the particular stillness of someone who had spent decades being the second most formidable presence in every room he entered and who had made peace with this. We've catalogued them. He's made 214. They're arranged along the windowsill in his cell by fold quality, most recent at the left, earliest at the right. The first 3 are noticeably inferior to the current production. The last 40 are approximately consistent. He said 60 before consistency. It appears he was wrong by 20. Sale Voreth paused. There is also a small cluster of 7 that are a different size. He appears to have made smaller ones when he ran out of the standard paper size and began tearing sheets into quarters. She sat with this image for a moment, the cluster of small ones, the improvisation when the material changed, the consistency of the practice regardless. The human tendency to continue routine under confinement is documented, Sale Voreth said. He said it neutrally, which was his way of saying something that was not neutral. Yes, she said, I know. A pause. He has also begun making a second variety, Sale Voreth said. Smaller birds of a different wing configuration. The duty officer asked him about them, and he said they were sparrows. His mother kept sparrows as a child on the street outside her window, and they would eat crumbs she left on the sill. She looked at her prime warden for a moment. Sale Voreth looked back at her with the controlled impassivity of a person who had been performing controlled impassivity for 19 years in the service of a ruler who expected it, and who was, at this moment, performing it harder than usual. Thank you, Sale, she said. Of course, he said. The diplomatic delegation's preliminary itinerary has been received. Shall I put together? Yes, she said. Put together the briefing. He left. She sat at her desk in the morning light and thought about a woman on a crowded human street leaving crumbs on a windowsill for birds, and about the specific kind of mind that holds that image for 40 years, and then reproduces it in paper when the material is available, in a cell on an alien planet, out of nothing more complicated than the fact that the image has weight, and things with weight must be carried. She thought about Jivatman. She had encountered the word in a cultural exchange document once, a philosophical concept from one of humanity's oldest wisdom traditions. The individual living soul, indestructible and irreducible, navigating every illusion the world constructs around it while remaining, underneath everything, precisely itself. The spark that cannot be filed, cannot be fully documented, cannot be predicted by even the most thorough xenobiological study. She looked at her hands. She thought about the paper crane on the table between them, listing to one side imperfect. She thought 41 years is a long time to be architectural. On the 45th day, word came that 2 more life pods had been located. One at the neutral zone boundary, exactly as projected. One much farther out, having drifted on the subspace current for 5 weeks, its emergency drive depleted, carrying 3 survivors who were dehydrated and exhausted, and whose relief at rescue was, according to the patrol vessel commander who filed the report, something worth looking at. She read this report at her desk in the early morning before her schedule began. She held it for a moment. She had the report sent to Commander Idle before her morning briefing. She had the duty officer include the names of the survivors so he could cross-check against his crew manifest. His reply came in the early afternoon. It contained no words, only a sequence of characters that her translator identified as human punctuation. A period, followed by something called an ellipsis, followed by something the translator labeled simply as informal gratitude marker, category, relief. She read this for a moment, then she sent back a single word, good. The translation matrix flagged this as potentially too informal for official diplomatic correspondence. She sent it anyway. On the 62nd day, the diplomatic delegation arrived. They were 4 humans, a senior envoy named Castellan Myra Voth, 2 attachés, and a military liaison who had the restrained posture of someone accustomed to rooms where the politics were more dangerous than the weapons. They came through the formal entrance, were received by Sale Vorath and the household protocols she had approved, and were installed in the visitors' wing. She met with them in the throne room, large, formal, everything at the designed angle. The message, I know what rooms are for. Envoy Voth was accomplished. Not brilliant, but accomplished. She knew the treaty language, she knew the precedents. She had clearly prepared extensively for this meeting, and she did not flinch at the room's architecture or at the extended silences that Suvathas allowed to settle between exchanges. The negotiation lasted 3 days. It was mostly about terms. There were minor concessions on both sides. There were several hours of disagreement about the status of the detainment facility where the 3 perihelion survivors had been held, which were resolved by the military liaison and Sale Vorath in a side session. On the 3rd day, Commander Idle was brought to the throne room. He was wearing his own clothes. She had ordered them cleaned and returned 2 days prior, which had generated a brief internal query from the duty officer that she had declined to explain. He stood where he'd stood 62 days before, hands loose at his sides, and he looked at her. She looked at him. She was aware of Envoy Voth and the attachés and the military liaison. She was aware of her 12 royal guard. She was aware of Sale Vorath's controlled attention at her right shoulder. Commander Idle, she said in his language as she had on the first day. Queen Suvathas, he said. His pronunciation of her name was still imperfect. It was a difficult name for human vocal architecture, but it was better than it had been on the 15th day, which was the first time he'd tried it, when she had corrected him, and he had repeated it 3 times in a row until he had something she recognized. The terms are settled, she said. You'll be released into the custody of Envoy Voth's delegation this afternoon. I know, he said. Voth briefed me this morning. I wanted to tell you myself. A pause. Envoy Voth did not move. The attachés did not move. The Royal Guard did not move. The Section 7 boundary clause, he said. In the Cathara Accord, the ambiguous passage. Yes. Your interpretation was correct, he said. I looked up the original negotiating minutes. Your version is what was intended. I know. I wanted to tell you. He was looking at her the way he had looked at the groundskeeper's window. She understood now what that look was. She had identified it in her own time without assistance. It was the look of someone paying full attention, not to what you represented or what you could do for them or what category of thing you were, but simply to you, to the specific thing that was you and not any other thing in the universe. 41 years. She had been looked at as a ruler, as an adversary, as a symbol, as a problem to be solved or a power to be leveraged or a fact to be worked around. She had not, in 41 years, been looked at quite like that. "Commander Idle," she said. "Yes." "Your sister," she said. "In the colony system, you haven't spoken to her in," she thought back, 69 days now by your count." 72, he said, "but it's fine. When we talk, we pick up where we left off." "Yes," she said, "you told me." "Right," he tilted his head. "Were you going to say something about my sister?" "No," she said. "I was going to say that when you speak to her again, you might tell her about the stone bird." Something happened in his face. All at once, the same systemic rearrangement she'd witnessed on the 23rd day, the smile with its crooked leftward lean, the lines at the corners of his eyes, the current underneath the words that would be there in everything he said for the next few minutes. And the thing happened in her face. It was not a full smile. The xenobiologists would have recorded it as insufficient, insufficient for their document, insufficient for the anatomical case they had made. But it was the corner again, the outer edge, and this time the amplitude was, she could feel it, considerably larger than the two previous instances. It was the largest her face had done in 41 years. It was, in any objective measure, a very small change to a face that most people described as architectural. But Commander Idle saw it. She knew he did because of what happened to his own face in response. The smile did not get larger, there was not more of it, but it got different. It got quieter. It went inward rather than outward, became something held rather than expressed, and she recognized, without needing anyone to explain it to her, what that meant. She had seen people hold something carefully before. She understood the posture of care. She was aware, precisely, clinically, with 41 years of training in reading rooms, that every person in the throne room was performing absolute stillness, and that their stillness was a different quality than usual. The Royal Guard were not still the way they were still when nothing was happening. They were still the way people are still when something is happening that they will remember for the rest of their lives, and they do not want to disturb. She knew with the same precision that Sail Vorath had stopped breathing. She returned her attention to Commander Marcus Idle. "Go," she said, "before I find another treaty clause to argue about." The left side of his mouth moved. "Section 4, he said, "Resource extraction rights. Your interpretation is completely wrong." "It absolutely is not." "I'll send you a document." "I will not read it." "You'll read it," he said. She said nothing, but she did not correct him. They took him to the holding suite where Envoy Voth's delegation was waiting, and the doors of the throne room closed, and Sail Vorath released a very slow, very controlled breath at her right shoulder, and one of the Royal Guard, she could not see which one, they were in her peripheral vision, but she would review the surveillance footage later, shifted his weight from his left foot to his right, which was the most movement any of them had shown in over an hour. The document arrived 17 days later, forwarded through the formal diplomatic channel, as Commander Idle had apparently not had access to an unofficial one. It was a 40-page analysis of Section 4 of the Cathara Accord with extensive footnotes and 2 appendices. He was wrong on approximately 60% of his points. He was right on the other 40%, and the 40% he was right on were the parts she had been quietly uncertain about for years. She read the entire thing in one sitting. She wrote a 43-page response. She worked on it for 6 days. It was thorough. She had Sail Vorath route it through the same formal diplomatic channel. 3 weeks later she received his reply. It was 12 pages and a cover message that said, "Okay, you were right about most of it. I'm keeping Section 4, Paragraph 3. Will send evidence when I find better evidence. Also, they found the last 4 life pods. All survivors. Thought you'd want to know." She sat with the message for a moment. She sat with it the way she sat with things that had weight. The way she had sat with the Cathara Accord the night before she signed it. The way she had sat with the surveillance feed image of Newvery's first steps, watched and re-watched on a night when the palace was quiet, and the planet's twin moons were at apogee, and she had not had a reason to be in the natal chamber but had gone there anyway. All survivors. Something in her face moved. In the empty office, with the bioluminescent column throwing its rose-gold light across the blackless case that held the xenobiologist's report, she sat alone, and the smallest possible version of the largest change her face had made in 41 years moved through the corner of her mouth and stayed there for a moment, and then was gone. She pulled up the diplomatic channel document interface. She typed, "Good. And regarding paragraph 3 of section 4, you are still wrong. Send better evidence when you have it." She paused. Then below that in a second line she typed, "The groundskeepers have fixed the stone bird. It is now leaning slightly to the right." She sent it. She returned to her schedule. There were 34 items on today's agenda, each of them significant, each of them demanding the face the xenobiologists had catalogued. Complete, impassive, architectural. She provided this face as she had always provided it to each item in turn, to each person who entered her chambers and addressed her and was addressed in return. She was 41 years into this face. She would be in it for the rest of her reign. But in the corner of it, in the outer edge where the change had been, something was different now. Not visible. Not to anyone who hadn't been looking from 3 meters away on the 23rd day and every day after that. Only different in the way that things which have moved once are different from things that have never moved. In the way that a door is different, even when it is closed, from a wall. She had thought about the xenobiologist's report in the blacklist case. She had thought about the word they had used, architectural. A face designed for nothing, wanting nothing, lacking nothing. She thought of Commander Marcus Idle standing at a window, laughing. She thought of what it meant to be a living soul, a Jivatman, individual, indestructible, impossible to fully account for in any document, no matter how thorough. The soul that navigates the illusions of every role assigned to it and somehow remains, underneath them all, irreducibly itself. The spark that cannot be predicted, cannot be systematized, cannot be filed away. She thought of 41 years. She thought of section 4, paragraph 3. He was wrong about it. She was going to make him understand exactly why, and then he was going to send another document, and she was going to write another response, and this was going to go on for some time. She found, reviewing her schedule, that she did not object to this. The Queen of the Vethra, whose face the xenobiologists had declared complete, picked up her work and proceeded through the day. And if there was a quality to the silence in her chambers that was different from the silence that had been there for 41 years, a quality that those who had been attending her the longest could not quite name, but that every one of them noticed, in the way you notice a door that has been opened even when it is now closed, she did not acknowledge it. She only worked. And somewhere, 17 light minutes away, a diplomatic dispatch was waiting to be read by a man named Commander Marcus Idle, who would read the postscript about the stone bird and whose face would do what faces do, and who would sit for a moment with something that had weight. The universe ran its arithmetic. People moved through it, each carrying something indestructible and irreducible and impossible to fully document, and sometimes, not often and never predictably, and always to the specific astonishment of everyone who witnessed it. 2 of those things touched, briefly, across the vast and ordinary distances, and something moved that had not moved before. She had thought many times in the weeks after Commander Idle left about what the xenobiologists had gotten wrong. Not in their data was precise and accurate and anatomically sound. They had gotten the architecture right. What they had missed was something smaller and harder to measure, the door in the wall. A wall can look exactly like a wall. It can function as a wall. Every structural test can confirm it as a wall. And somewhere in it, in the outer corner, in the place where the material has been held rigid for 41 years, there is a door. Not a door anyone has ever opened. Not a door that has ever shown signs of being anything other than wall. And then a human stands at a window and laughs at 3 groundskeepers and a ceremonial stone bird. And the door opens, just slightly, just at the corner, and it turns out it was always a door. She kept the paper cranes. She had not expected to keep them. Commander Idle had not asked her to, had not made any gesture toward them on the day he left, had left them where they were without ceremony. 214 cranes arranged by fold quality along a windowsill in a cell she had ordered cleaned and reassigned. She had the cranes moved to a secondary cabinet in her private office before the reassignment. She was not certain why. She had thought about this with her usual precision and had not reached a satisfying conclusion. The cranes were not valuable. They were not politically significant. They were paper. They would degrade. She kept them anyway. Sale Voreth had not commented on the cabinet. He had noticed it. He noticed everything, and had made the small adjustment of simply not mentioning it, which was the 19-year professional courtesy of a man who understood which silences were part of his job. She had made 4 more cranes herself, in the mornings before her schedule began, in the quality of quiet that belongs to early hours before the palace woke. The 4th one was better than her first. The 5th was better than the 4th. She did not keep them arranged by quality. She kept them together in a corner of the cabinet with his. 218 cranes, not near 999, not a wish. But she had begun. She thought of what he had said on the day she had asked what he would wish for, the obvious thing, to go home, and then no. To know they were all right. She thought about the difference, about a person who, given the option, chooses not the thing that benefits themselves but the thing that would end their uncertainty about the people they carried, about the weight of other people, the specific and permanent weight of them, the way they don't leave when they're gone, the way they insist on being carried. All survivors. She read the message again as she had been reading it occasionally in the weeks since, not the 12 pages, the cover note. All survivors. She was the queen of the Vethra, 32 inhabited systems under her governance, 41 years of impassive architectural stewardship. She had signed accords and ordered campaigns, and managed the arithmetic of power, with the precision the xenobiologists had found so complete as to seem like the absence of something rather than its presence. She had been right to read it as power. She had been right about the efficiency of completeness. There was nothing wrong with the wall. But in the corner of the wall, the door. The stone bird leaned slightly to the right. It was enough.